One sort of problem that I've noticed that I wanted to cover was the inability of people to discern arrogance, confidence, and authority. And so, what I'd like to do is point out the differences between things like arrogance, confidence, authority, certainty, and ignorance, and maybe talk about why we've lost the ability to tell them apart. Let me show you what I mean. So here I'll use the so-called allegory of the cave, Plato's cave. Obviously, I'm using this for deliberate reasons. One is well studied. In fact, I have a video on it. Largely misunderstood thing. And aside from that, I can bring, the goods there, right? So you can go reference that whenever you want to back up my claims. So I'm not being arrogant there because I bring the goods, right? The references from the book, but it's also to provide this contrast, right? And the thing is, you can make a claim from your own authority about a thing in the world, right? And that is never and can never be objective. And it's not that I believe in objectivity as such. I've talked about objective material reality, OMR, right? I have a video on, this objectivism, this individualism, right? And this materialism that sort of creeped in everywhere. The three go together for some reason. But there's a big difference between information that, say, is given because someone spoke it, we'll say on their own authority with high confidence, right? And information that is backed up independently of that person, right? So it's verifiable outside of that person's experience or that person's statement. And that is usually what people mean when they're talking about objective. They mean independently verifiable. In other words, it's something that exists not just in someone's head, right? But it exists outside of their head and you have access to it. And that's how you know it's outside of their head. So a book is a good example, right? I can point to a book, translation issues aside, and say, this is the book and this is what it says. And you can go get a copy of the book and look for yourself. People often don't do that work. That's a different problem. I'll cover that in a future video. If you want me to, leave a comment. I will cover that. And it's this independent verification that's so important in determining what people are talking about and how they're talking about it. Are they being arrogant? Are they being overly confident? Are they just making claims, right, without actually engaging with those claims? Because again, a lot of people end up actually doing that, unfortunately. And that doesn't rule out a shared hallucination, right? It doesn't rule that thing out. In fact, there's a game called a MUSH, multi-user shared hallucination. Very old. I think that's 80s technology in computers, text-based, right? So that can happen, right? Or maybe a bunch of people can sort of find out the same thing. Maybe they had a bad professor in college and believe that the so-called allegory of the cave says something specific, right? But that's sort of a different issue, right? And so with this, ability to validate or verify with a text, you get a lot, right? You gain a lot of insight about the person, right? And so I'm not going to make a claim, nor did I in my earlier video on Plato's Cave about what Plato says alone, right? I'm going to use the book or the text in this case as an independent authority rather than just my subjective remembrance or my experience of reading it, right? That's not sufficient. And so just to illustrate this, and I've been working on this for a while, so I hope this works. Let's suppose that some person out there, somebody that you know, right, goes ahead and states that Plato's cave is an allegory about breaking free from some oppressive system of control. And they may appeal to any number of movies. I've been over these movies before, like The Matrix. It's a big one, right? Or maybe actual quotes from the book, right? Because Plato talks about what would happen, right, if somebody were released, right? How that would go. And so hopefully they're appealing to quotes from a book as well, right, to make the point. Now, there are various ways that I could counter this claim. So this is about me in this case, right, as the contrast to their subjective and I would say as close to objectively as you can get incorrect statement. I'll leave that point aside. We'll just assume that we can't determine their statements' correctness or incorrectness. So let's focus on the statements that I can make. So I could make a statement in refutation of the previous statement where I said, I seem to remember that what is in the book is an impossible proposition or an imagining. Okay? And that's sort of leaning more on my memory, right? And so it's a slightly lower confidence claim. And authority is the book or the text by memory. It's book 7, by the way, right? By memory, by way of memory. Now, I may do that on purpose, by the way. We'll get into that later. Another way I could do this is I can ask the person that made the statement where in the book that reference is. Like, where are you getting this from in book 7 of Plato's Republic, please? Right? And that's heavily leaning on the book while still refuting the claim that was made, right? It's a much higher confidence statement, right? And the authority is entirely in the book. And notice that I'm shifting the burden from me refuting it to the book, right, needing to speak for itself, or the person needing to use the book to back up their point, because they didn't in their statement. The statement's wrong, by the way, completely wrong, right? But there's a difference between those two ways of challenging the claim. And hopefully you're seeing this contrast. So another way I could do this, I'm going to give you lots of contrast, hopefully. I can make a statement that I know of a section in the book that contradicts your point, right? So I can say, there is no hero in the allegory of the cave. Okay, that's true, by the way. I could state that, right? Now, I'm not directly refuting the point, right? I'm just saying that statement's not in the book, right? Or another thing you could do is you could say, well, it begins saying that this book 7 is about education and the want of education, which doesn't support a hero's journey at all. I could say that. I could say either one of those two things. And then that's a lower certainty claim, right? Because you're indirectly refuting it. You're not directly refuting it, right? But it's high confidence in authority, right? It's high confidence. And the authority is in me and the book. So I'm saying there's a section of the book that I think indicates that your claim might be false without directly refuting the claim. It's a very different statement from the first two. And there's a fourth way, and I'm not trying to make an exhaustive list, right? But there's a fourth way I can do this. I can make a claim that the book doesn't contain that statement at all. I can use the book as an authority, right? I can say the book says that you cannot break free of your chains ever. Okay, that is, in fact, by the way, what the book says. Again, reference the Plato's Cave Lies video, right? That has all the references, so you can look it up yourself, independent of me. I don't need any confidence in what I'm saying because all the confidence is in the book. right? And that's using the book as an authority, right? It's a high certainty, high confidence claim. All of the authority is in the book. None of it's in me. I'm just saying, it's not what the book says, right? And in my video, I go through, I give you the goods on which sections say what, right? And all of those are very different statements, very different implications, right? And it's very hard to discern these issues of authority and confidence, right? And certainty, because they're not the same thing at all. And we tend to bundle them into one thing, right? And none of those four statements that I gave you are arrogant. The initial claim is arrogant. It's also wrong. Those two don't necessarily go together, but they often go together, right? And let me show you another arrogant claim about the allegory of the cave and tell you why it's arrogant. So instead of, say, the first statement, which is a little soft, in my opinion, right, you could say Plato's cave is an expression of the hero's journey to free himself from society writ large and become enlightened as a result, bettering mankind. Okay? Now, that statement is just bankrupt because it relies on no authority. It is a statement on one section of one book, we might refer to that as a chapter nowadays, of the text of the Republic, right? So referring to book 7, not the whole thing, you're only referring to a very small part of it, right? You're taking it entirely out of context, and you put it in a frame that didn't exist in Plato's time, the hero's journey. Plato didn't know anything about the hero's journey. The thing that Campbell's talking about, I have my doubts as to whether or not that's real at all. I go into that in another video. If you want to hear more about that, let me know. Put in a comment. I'll consider my comments. But these videos are a lot of work, especially when I do them like this. So I gotta have interest, or I won't feel motivated enough to do it. This claim's made by a single person with no appeal to sections of the original text, right? Just a bold statement that somebody threw out there, very arrogantly, right? Now, sure, there's a difference between information that you parrot, right? Because you were it was given to you by your professor or by these people who told you, well, the Matrix is really just the allegory of the cave, right? Or whatever, right? And because the Matrix is very much that story, right? And that's one way, right? You get bombarded with this idea or this set of ideas or this way of thinking about the allegory, and you think, aha, this must be correct. Everybody's thinking that way, right? So you're just a parrot. You haven't done any research. You haven't done any exploration. You haven't read the text, which would be handy when you're making a claim about a text. All right. And then there's a difference between that and information that you conclude, right? Right? Because maybe you did read the text and you just read it wrong, whatever, that happens all the time. But the trick is that you never know about the other person, right? And perhaps even yourself, right? Another great point by Jordan Peterson. You don't know ahead of time whether they got that through ignorance or genuine research and they're mistaken. You don't know, right? Because you can't know. Because it's them, not you. Right? It's very hard to draw conclusions about how people got to a place, because usually there's lots of ways to get to the same place. And so we can't know if they're being arrogant unless we have more knowledge than the other person. Now, that's generally true. It's not entirely true. There are ways, but I will save that for an entirely different type of video. If you want that sort of information, if you want to know sort of, I don't want to call them tricks of the trade, but roughly speaking, tricks of the trade, where you can tell when someone's being arrogant, comment, like this video, comment on the video, and tell me that's what you want to see. Okay? And maybe I will do that. That's a lot of work. But maybe I'll do that if enough people want it. So if you're sort of unsure of arrogance and the utility of arrogance, and again, like, I'm a pragmatist, so did you get there because you're stupid and you misread Plato's Republic, which some people clearly have done? A lot of people with PhDs seem to have done, as near as I can tell. I don't care, right? If it's that, or if you're speaking out of pure ignorance because you parroted the information, or if you're just getting emotional. I don't care. It's all arrogant to me. If you're correct, but you didn't do your research, arrogant. That's just the way I parse it. You don't have to parse it that way. I'm just saying that's what I do, right? But if you're unsure of the utility and indication of something like arrogance, I have a suggestion. I highly recommend watching old episodes of the show Columbo. Columbo was a detective show. It was rather good. And, no, really, watch it. And you might ask, why? Why would I want to watch this very old show? Because Columbo in the episodes is using knowledge, right, gnosis, against other people by leveraging their arrogance entirely. Okay? So he's not doing anything particularly tricky. He's, he's not doing anything untoward. He's not being sneaky. He's not doing the Sherlock Holmes thing. He's not doing any of that. Right? And some people may think, look, he's a modern day Sherlock Holmes. Not at all. Not at all. That's the interesting. I mean, there's one aspect that he may seem like Sherlock Holmes, but that's not the trick, because he gets people to confess. That's what he does. Sherlock Holmes doesn't get people to confess. He nails them with evidence. That's a totally different way of doing a detective thing, right? So it's more Perry Mason, right? Nail them with evidence. I'm pretty sure Sherlock Holmes came first, but whatever. When innocent people are at ease with you, because that's what Columbo does. He makes people at ease with him, right? He's very easygoing, he's very methodical, right? He, it's hard to tell, right? Is he bumbling, or is he feigning bumbling, like faking it? Doesn't really matter. But when innocent people are at ease with you, they will express their lack of confidence. And they'll be more confident in what they are certain of. And it will be easier to use standard techniques to lead them to remember things more accurately, right? There's a famous trick around this. I'm sure everybody knows it. Think back to where you were when this happened, right? And then you point to other details, like what color are the walls, sort of a thing, right? Where are you standing, right? And that jogs more and more memories. We have a technical outline of how that works. Accurate or not, it's certainly useful. And so they also defer more readily to authority. In this case, Columbo's a detective. He's an authority on solving the crime. That's what detectives are. They're authorities on solving crime. There may be other things, but there's certainly that. And the innocent people don't rebel, right? Because they're not being pushed. They're being helped. Columbo's not very threatening, right? Looks kind of harmless and bumbling, like on purpose or not, right? But you can see lots of advantages there to being that way around an innocent person. Arrogant people, on the other hand, they tip their hands. And that's what the show's all about, right? They tip their hands all the time because they get impatient, right? They believe they are in control of the situation. They rush because they want things to move on so they can get to their next scheme, right? Whatever it is, or move on with their lives, right? So they make mistakes, right? Arrogance tends to cause errors in logic. It tends to cause errors in reason, and it tends to cause errors in rationality. And so very highly logical, rational, and reasonable people, it's not that they lose their ability to logic, rationality, and reason or something. They don't lose that ability, but effectively they slip up, right? And they slip up not because they're illogical, unreasonable, or irrational, or any of that. They slip up on facts. And when you proceed from bad facts with good logic, you get bad results. And if somebody notices your bad results, they can pretty much nail down what happened. And the thing is, they're at ease too, right? Because they feel, again, that Columbo's not a threat, right? He certainly doesn't seem as smart and as quick as they are, right? So he's not a threat to their knowledge, to their gnosis. Not a threat at all, right? And, their lovely little lies and their level of control is intact. After all, they planned out what happened and they got away with it. They pulled it off. It's done. The thing is done. And it went the way they wanted. And how can anyone be smart enough at this point, things already done, to catch them? Yeah, it's done, it's finished. Their confidence is high. Their certainty is high, but it's false, right? Because if they reveal one out of place fact, their logic will fall apart and they will be forced to confess, which is what happens in the show. So that's why I recommend that show. And again, I think it's important that we think about this. Authority is one thing, confidence is something else, certainty is something else, right? Arrogance is entirely different. And we need to know that. And we don't. We don't. We need to know the difference between a claim, right, that you make, this is true, right? You may not make it that strongly, but a this is true sort of thing, versus a I wonder about, or I'm thinking of, or I'm pondering, or I'm playing with an idea. Those are very different modes of thought. Different propositions are made. They're couched in different framing, because sometimes this is an issue of framing. I have videos on framing, a lot of them actually. It's something you can watch out for, and you can tell the difference between someone who's very confident what they're saying and someone who isn't. Someone who's relying on an external, independently verifiable or validatable fact, and someone who isn't. Now, this is not foolproof. The big trick lately for the past 12, 15 years has been to cite something that doesn't say what you claim it says, but you know people are lazy and they're not going to look it up, and you sound awfully confident, and they don't catch that you're being arrogant. That doesn't work with me, by the way, because if you give me a reference, I'm going to look it up because I don't trust you. Sorry. Just the way I am. I like to know things for myself when I can, and I just happen to be blessed. I can. So I usually do. So hopefully those two examples, you can go watch Columbo. You can, rewind this, listen to it again, whatever, will help you to understand that there is a difference between authority, confidence, certainty, right? And the arrogance is very, very specific, but I would say easy to spot problem around the claim you're making and how you're making the claim. And with that, I would like to go out with a claim, which I cannot back up independently to any great degree, at least not by this one video. And that claim is that I am always very grateful to all of you for giving me the thing that I do in fact value the most, which is your time and attention.